Kia ora whanau, back to our dough. We are making our sweet tarts. Now, when I left you, I said leave it for half an hour, at least in the fridge. Mine's been about 2 days, because I meant to get onto it yesterday, but you know, Easter is Easter. Try and get it out of the fridge about 5 minutes before you're going to need to use it. You can see I've set or rested 2 different ways. So this way is really good for round tarts, because when you cut it off you start with a circle. This guy here is more if I was going to roll it into one sheet and cut out the sizes that I need. Okay, I'm just going to cut it into 4 even pieces. Okay, put the rest to the side. You can see it's already a circle, so in theory if I squash it the circle wise, this has only just come out of the fridge. If you give it at least 5 minutes it'll be a lot easier. And then we're just going to roll nice and gentle. You can see how short that pastry is by it wanting to crack just a little. Okay, then turn. A little bit of flour on the pin. And roll. We want it about 5 mil thick. I normally leave my sweet pastry a little bit thicker than my savoury pastry. And we want it to be just a little bit bigger than our tart. Okay, I'm going to do 2 different types of tarts. I'm going to use a round tart case, and that one I'm going to turn into a fruit flan. So just a quick grease. Right, I'll do one of each, and then go a bit quicker, i.e. time lapse the rest. Okay, so just a nice light grease, make sure it goes all the way through. Every time you work with pastry you want to give it a chance to rest, much like me. Every time I work out I rest, so try not to stretch the pastry. So I lift it right up, you can see it's right down into the corners, and push. If I have too much pastry on the outside it's going to start to pull it out of the flan tin. Okay, so right down into the corners. There's a little technique we used with our pizza as well, which is called docking. For this guy here, just a fork and a light dock. Again, that's going to help make sure that it rises nice and evenly. Our fruit flans are going to be blind baked. Okay, so while we're waiting, we're going to get a piece of baking paper. We're going to cut it big enough to cover easily. A paper ring, we use cartouches for all sorts of things, covering sauces. Sometimes we'll put a little hole in the middle if it's a hot sauce while we're letting it cool, which will create a chimney. This one, we don't want a hole in the middle, because we're going to scrunch it up so that it's pliable. Because the filling of the fruit flan is not going to be cooked, we need to make sure the pastry is cooked before we put the filling in. So what we're going to do is, I've normally got some baking rice or beans, which is going to hold the base flat. I'm just going to use some, and it's just a little bit of rice to hold the base down. You can't use this rice again to cook. You can use it as blind baking beans, but if you try to boil it, it won't work. I'm just going to trim a little bit of the excess at this stage. Okay, then I'm going to rest this dough. The reason I haven't trimmed it completely down to the edge of the tart is if I trim it and then rest it, it's going to possibly shrink. Okay, so that is our tart case for blind baking. So that goes onto a baking tray so that it can rest for at least 20 minutes, half an hour, and then it's going to go in the oven to cook, funnily enough, after I've trimmed the edges. So there's lots of little bits to forget as you're going. Okay, the other tart I'm making is a fruit frangipane tart. Quite often the fruit used is poached pear. Now the pears that I have are not cooking pears, and they're already very, very soft. So if I do use my pears, I'm not going to poach them. I'm just going to slice them nice and fine, and that should be fine. The worst that could happen, one reason we poach them is to soften them a little bit. We could use it to add flavour to it. The other reason is it's normally poached in a sugar syrup, which is going to stop that pear from going brown. So that could happen. I'm actually going to, this first one I'm actually going to make a Feijoa frangipane tart. Okay, so now I've got these nice little rectangle molds. Again, not too much flour. Again, lightly greased. It's a little bit trickier because we're going in square rather than round. But again, down in, so lift it up, so it goes down in, right down into the corners. You want a nice even thickness. You don't want the corners down the bottom to have twice as much pastry, which sometimes happens, or the other side to it, sometimes they have half as much pastry because people are pushing it in there. You don't want that. Okay, so again, I'm just going to trim a little bit of the excess, and that way it's going to stop it from coming out or lifting out of the case. Okay, I'm going to rest all of these on an oven tray in the fridge, and that way it just has a chance to do any shrinking it needs to do, etc., and work well. So again, we're just going to give that a nice little dock. So you don't have to push all the way through the pastry, but it just makes sure that it rises nice and evenly. So when that does come out of the fridge, I'm just going to cut off the edges either with a knife to that level, or generally I'll just go like that and squash, and it'll cut off the edges nice and evenly. And then we're going to fill it. I've got a frangipane mixture. It is pretty simple. It is, in fact, there's another YouTube on that one, so have a little look for that one. But it's basically just cream, butter and sugar with almond meal is the main flavouring. But because almond meal is quite oily, we need something to bind it together, so there's a little bit of flour to hold that together. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of jam in the bottom. I've got two different choices. I've made a Feijoa and quince sauce, which is a bit thicker, or I've got this beautiful clear quince jelly, which might go in the bottom, depending what I feel like at the time. I'm going to continue doing my bases. I'm going to, all of any leftover pastry, you are allowed to reuse. You are allowed to shape it again. Just try not to work it too much. Okay, so I'm going to do all of mine first, then I'm going to put all of the trimmings together and roll it. But you can see, just bring it together and then roll it and work again, nice and short. But the more we work it, the tougher it's going to be and the more it's going to shrink. Okay, so I'm going to continue lining all of my pie tins or flan rings. Then I will see you again for the next step. Alright, so putting our frangipane tarts together. As I said, generally all I do is make sure that all the edges are out. So these have been just in the fridge. I like to form them again and then re-rest them. So this one I'm going to go with my Feijoa and quince sauce. Now you don't want too much, otherwise whatever you put on top is going to slop around a little bit. But as I said, it's just, and the other one I'm going to use is a quince jelly for a couple of them. It's just, one, it's adding a bit of flavour, two, it's getting a nice layer of sugar in between the filling and the case. Sometimes when people are blind baking, they'll create that nice seal with a little bit of egg white. Okay, so now we've got that little bit of jam, and then got our frangipane. So again, it's been out of the fridge so that it can soften up a little bit. And you'll notice that I'm not just putting it on one side and squishing all the way along. I'm not going to fill it up too much because this will expand. Okay, and then I just give it a little even out, because what's going to happen is with my fruit, as I prepared earlier, this one I'm going to go for a feijoa, and as I put the feijoa in, what I can do is just push that frangipane so that it's nice and even. Okay, and then keeping those feijoas in order, in their shingling order, a nice even distance between them. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do some pear ones. Generally with a pear frangipane tart, we would poach the pear first. My pears are quite soft, so I'm just going to cut one side and slice it nice and thin into a semicircle, so I can do the same effect with pear. Now it is a feijoa frangipane, so I'm going to just squeeze one more in there. But you can see that by doing that and a bit of a squash down, those feijoas are seated into the frangipane. The frangipane's coming all the way to the edges. I've got my tart trimmed. Now that it's had a chance to rest, there's less chance of it shrinking again. This is going to be baked all together, so it's all good. So again, squash off the edges, thumb up just to make sure that it's nice and even all the way around. A little bit of jam, a little bit of frangipane, and your fruit. I wouldn't use kiwi fruit, orange. Strawberry might work alright, and Tamarillo might hold together well enough, but generally, yeah, you don't really want something that's too full of liquid like the kiwi fruit and acidity. So we're going to stick with pear and feijoa for these guys. Okay. Okay, so these are now rested for at least half an hour, a little bit longer because I was waiting for the oven. All we're going to do is take them off the tray, take the paper out, just like we did with our rectangles. We're going to take off the excess, thumb up the edges. They've been docked. The cartouche goes back in. You can use anything, you don't have to use rice. You could use soup mix, the dry soup mix, or chickpeas or lentils, whatever you've got that you don't mind wasting, because like I say, you won't be able to cook them for their original purpose again, but you can reuse that rice the next time you blind bake, or chickpeas or whatever you use. Okay, so then generally these go straight from the fridge into the oven at 180 baking. And at the same time, I will get my fruit frangipane tarts out of the fridge, and again straight out of the fridge into the oven. So they're all trimmed, ready to go. Okay. My French pan tarts are ready to go. And as we come over here, we can see we've got 180, and they are in the middle. Once those blind baking shells are just a little bit brown around the edges, we're going to take that rice out, put them back in just to make sure that the center is cooked, because they will not be cooked again once the filling goes in. So we have to make sure they cook through. So therefore our French pan tarts will probably cook a little bit longer than those for today.